Now that we've learned about loops, let's take a look at our demo. Going back to Visual Studio, I'll pull up my loop sample program. Inside the main method, I have a for loop in which value 1 goes from 0 through just less than 5. If I click the green play button, I can hold this output window side by side. Here we can see that value 1 goes from 0 through 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that's the last value of value 1. That's because the loop stops at just less than 5 as it increases the value by 1. Next we have value 2, which goes down from 5 down through 4, 3, 2, and then 1. And the way it does that is in the second loop, we have value 2 starting at 5, it's initialized to 5, and then while it's greater than 0, it continues to write out the value of value 2 right before decreasing the value 2 by 1. So in this case, value 2 goes from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then stops as long as it's greater than 0. Finally, we have another loop. So the for loop down here is a little more complicated. It starts at 1, or rather at 5, and then it keeps going down with I minus minus. The 5 goes down through 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, but not really. It's going to go as long as it's greater than value 2. If you recall, value 2 right above stopped at 0. So 5 would normally go down to 0. But these continue and break statements will actually change how it behaves. So let's see how that works. So every time it goes through an iteration, it prints out in iteration, it prints out a number. So we see in iteration 5. It checks to see whether the value is 3 or not. It's not 3 the first time around, so it keeps going. It checks to see whether it's 2 or not. Well, it's not 2 either, so it keeps going, and it says done with iteration. So it prints done with iteration 5. Next, it's in iteration 4, and once again, it checks to see whether it's 3 or 2, and then it says done with iteration 4. So the third time around, it behaves differently. It says in iteration 3, but when it checks to see whether it's in iteration 3 or not, it encounters this continue statement. If you recall, we mentioned that continue makes it go back up through the loop. So it never prints out done with iteration 3. As you can see, the next line, it says in iteration 2. Well, when it's in iteration 2, it hits this if block here in line 32, where it actually breaks away out of this for loop. So it never prints done with iteration 2, and it never even goes through iteration 1 at all. So that's done. Let's go to the lower part of the code. So the last part here, or the second last part rather, you're checking to see whether new value is 1, 2, or something else. So here, it's printing out the value is 5, or the value 5 is not 1 or 2. And why does it do that? It goes directly to this else block. That's because it checks to see whether new value is 1, it checks to see whether it's 2, but it's neither 1 nor 2. The value is initialized to the number 5. So it prints out whatever is in the else block. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have if and else blocks, it can only do one of them, not one or more. Finally, at the bottom, we have a switch statement. So let's see what the result looks like. The result is exactly the same. And this is to illustrate that we can have an if-else block and replace it with a switch case statement if the values are numeric in nature. So in this case, I'm checking to see switch new value, which says if new value is first case, second case, and so on. And within each of the case blocks, I can have one or more statements followed by a break statement. So it's not 1, it's not 2. Since the value is 5, it goes down to this default block, which is equivalent to an else statement. So it prints out the value 5 is not 1 or 2. Finally, we have the console.read key statement, which is just waiting for user input. And that is the end of our loop sample demo.